love.
Yeah, no, that's great, because that kind of leads into like how important it is then to have the balance between the Eros and the Agape.
Sure.
And understanding the differences between the two of them and how important they are in a relationship. So we have 5 tips to balance both the Eros and the Agape love. So number 1 is to recognize the importance of both Eros and Agape love in a relationship. So basically making sure that we have a balance and that we understand that that balance isn't always going to be equal, but that it exists in a relationship,
and
right?
that it fluctuates. Sometimes like
ebbs and flows, right?
Yeah, ebbs and flows. It's like, you don't feel as sexually attracted to your partner. Maybe you need to work a little harder, and vice versa. Maybe that impulse to be closely together, because it's like you're eating rice and beans all day for 22 years and you want to try something else. It's like, maybe you shouldn't be trying something, but maybe you need to work on connecting more intimately with. You like that?
Kind of feeling like you're saying I'm rice and beans.
No.
I know how much you love your rice and beans.
I love rice and beans, and
white rice.
White rice and beans. That's my favorite.
My white rice.
You know it. So, okay, we get it on track, right?
We are. But it's cute. Because it's a good analogy. I mean, it's like, right? I'm eating chicken every day. Sometimes I want a steak or shrimp or something.
But, and sometimes you got to kind of like take.
You got to dress up that chicken. Dress it up.
Okay, next one.
That was good.
Okay.
Number 2. Cultivate both types of love. So it's important to have both, incorporate both into your relationship.
Yeah, you gotta make an effort.
Like we were just saying, that you got to make an effort when it comes to the Eros, because that's, you're with somebody for a long time. You're right. Things can become stale.
Yes.
So you have to work at it.
And so that's the first thing that's going to go.
Oh, of course.
And you're just keeping it real. It's like, that impulse doesn't last.
No.
So if that impulse doesn't last, it's like a drug, right? Like a junkie looking for a high, constantly looking for a high.
I look at it like, when you have a fire and how there's that slow glowing simmer. It's there. You have love for each other. There's something there. But you got to do stuff. You got to throw some lighter fluid on that and get that going here and there. You know what I mean?
This is like a perfect example, because I was looking at something earlier today, right? Because Romeo...
Look it up on your phone?
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet. Because I remember part of the quote, but I don't remember the whole thing. So I got to kind of like read it, right? Because this is what happened in Romeo and Juliet, right? Romeo is constantly in and out of love. Constantly. The impulsive Eros out of him, right? So he's forewarned. And in the novel, this is the foreshadowing, and Shakespeare does a good job at foreshadowing and explaining like these different issues, right? So when they go to get married, Friar Lawrence says this line to him, and I think that this stuff is pretty cool when it comes to understanding that Eros part and how that part could actually be somewhat destructive, right? So Friar Lawrence says, "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph died, like fire and powder, which, as they kiss, consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness, and in the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore, love moderately."
Yes.
Right. So,
that's good.
If you don't realize that you have to love that impulse, it has to be in moderation, like everything else. The long-term success of your relationship may not be there.
Right. Yeah.
Because you have to.
It's not sustainable. Yeah. It isn't sustainable. Yeah. You're right. Which is great for number 3, because you have to be able to communicate openly and honestly.
Yes.
That's really important. I know that's sometimes that's the vulnerability part that we're talking about being open and sharing and exposing ourselves to the other person. And I think that's difficult, whether it's the physical or the emotional side. In either case, it's difficult to do. So that's important.
And it doesn't help much too that we have like, and I think that we're beginning to be like really, this is one thing about our society that we're beginning to really transform, is the very rigid, static roles that we have placed on individuals in society, right? As a whole, like there's things that we could talk about that, but there's a lot of good conversation going about understanding the detriment of such a rigid roles, because when you have such rigid roles, that limits the potential for communication and openness and vulnerability.
Okay. I know what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
On both sides.
I understand.
On whoever sides it is.
Right.
So like the more that we begin to take the stigma away from vulnerability.
Right. Brene Brown.
Yeah, Brene Brown.
Hashtag.
Yeah.
Maybe she's watching.
And well, hopefully. But those things, that's an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And those are really powerful conversations that we are having as a society.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So number 4 is to prioritize selflessness and sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, what I get from that is that you got to be able to make compromises and concessions in your relationship.
I mean, I always say this quote. I always say it because I think it's one of the most powerful quotes from the Quran. It says, how dare you think you're going to enter the garden of bliss without facing the trials of those that came before you, right? I think that is a one telling quote, because the reality is that you have to sacrifice. Life doesn't mean anything without sacrifice, and
there's no experience if you're not sacrificing something.
Exactly. You don't know the opposite without sacrifice.
Yeah. Exactly. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And lastly, maintain physical and emotional intimacy.
Yeah. Again, that's connecting. That's taking care of that bond.
I want to say this too. It's funny because, we've been talking about both physical and the emotional side of relationships and love, right? And one of the things that a lot of people feel is that relationships are about that physical, right? Like that's the driving, that's important. If you don't have that, you got nothing, right? And while that is important, because not only is it a want, but it's also a need for people. I think that's important to have physical closeness with somebody and be close to somebody in that way, in a vulnerable way, right? That being emotionally intimate is important. And somebody broke this down to me once a long time ago. And he said, intimacy is into me, see. And I thought that was beautiful because I was just like, wow. So it's not just about sex and the physical aspect of love, but it's about that emotional, which is what we've been talking about, being vulnerable and exposing ourselves to the other person. Yeah. And letting go of the boundaries and having trust in another individual. And that's the beauty of love.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.